react. You're whispering my name, thinking I won't be the same. Turn fiction into fact. See what you didn't know, bruises that I'll never show, slipping on your every jab. So tighten up your fist, step into the ring with this. I hope your mama's got your back. First round, you thought you would've knocked me down. Fifth round, bleeding out the side of your mouth. Final round, holding the sound of my name in the crowd. You hit a buzz. Oh, 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 oh. You hit a buzz. Oh, 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 oh. Just 'cause I took a break, you're making a huge mistake, thinking you can take the throne. Look at you trembling, step into the lion's den. Bet you wish you stayed at home. Begging for mercy underneath your breath when I ain't even sweating yet. My legend's written in the stone, yeah. You're crying age, you're in defeat is now your only friend. Even your mama's gotta know. First round, you thought you would've knocked me down. Fifth round, bleeding out the side of your mouth. Final round, holding the sound of my name in the crowd. You hit a buzz. Oh, 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 oh. You hit a buzz. Oh, 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 First round, fifth round, final round. Oh, 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 yeah. First round, fifth round, final round. No, 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 no. First round, you thought you would've knocked me down. Fifth round, bleeding out the side of your mouth. Final round, holding the sound of my name in the crowd. You hit a buzz. Oh, 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 oh. You hit a buzz. Oh, oh,
Hello, hello, and welcome everyone to In Time. My name is Nicholas Lamar Suter. With me today is my co-host 𝐒𝐤𝐬𝐴𝐺, and with us also is Not Brooks. Gentlemen, how are you?
I'm doing well.
Doing good.
All right. Well, thank you very much. So we just saw the January 6th hearings, the first day, and this is the start of In Time's coverage of that. We are going to be carrying all of the hearings live. We don't know how many they're going to be. We've been told between 5 and 6, but on that hearing they said, well, several weeks. So if they're doing 2 or 3 a week, it may be a long month. So we're going to cover each one. We're going to have each one live. We try not to make too much commentary on that. Sometimes it's a little hard where they make some pretty serious allegations. But and then we save it for the discussion here. If you like what you see, like, subscribe, hit us up in the Discord. You can see what we're doing on this and the other things we cover. We're going to be getting back to Ukraine We are doing a deep dive on a long lead story that I'm looking forward to coming out hopefully in a couple of weeks, depending on how long this takes. So there's a lot going on. Join us on the Discord. Do like and subscribe. It really does help us out. That's, believe me, I don't shill that for my health. So what is it that we are looking at when we look at these hearings? And I just want to frame this just a little bit before we go forward. It can be long and boring for some people. Other people are glued to it. This isn't a lot of this is theater, and I think most of us recognize that. This isn't, there are legal consequences for this. This is an actual hearing, which means anybody who lies to Congress here is committing what is it? It's not just perjury. I think it's contempt of Congress to lie during a congressional hearing. So you need to realize, could these people be lying? Yes, but it's very serious. Now, this isn't the first time they've heard any of this testimony. They already know what the witnesses are going to say. So why are we seeing this? We're seeing this because while the committee is not yet done, it expects to have its findings completed, as I understand it, in roughly November. They have enough to have reached a conclusion, and their conclusion is that Trump acted with seditious intent, I guess. He made Trump committed a seditious conspiracy. That is their conclusion. Now, we've heard a number of objections. Well, gee, why aren't we hearing from the other side? Yada, yada, yada. In a perfect world, that's already been done. And what I mean by that is this committee, that was the goal of this committee, was to, quote, reach the truth, and what they are saying is they have now reached it, at least enough that they feel comfortable telling the public about their conclusions. These are initial conclusions. They are presumably going to present evidence. They don't have to. They don't have to do anything, really. This is actually just a show for the public, and we're going to discuss how and why they're doing that show, and this was their opening statements. They're telling us what we can expect to see. I will tell you this. Fox News is the only network news organization that has not covered it, but the Wall Street Journal, in fact, and so has one other. I'll look at the sources and say what they have come out. Both of those are owned by Rupert Murdoch and appear to have been highly critical of Trump based on this. And what they're really trying to do, I think, is to reach people who have not been paying attention, who haven't heard this, and said that these are our findings, and then eventually they will release an entire report that will, in the cases where it hasn't already been referred to a prosecutor of some kind, will be referred to a prosecutor. They can't prosecute these things themselves. They're fact finders. So what they are doing now is saying, we believe we have reached a conclusion. We believe we have done it fairly. That's why you have Republicans there too, but the Democrats are in charge. So their goal isn't to try him. Their goal is to reach the truth. They believe they have, and they are letting us know roughly what they believe they have found. They are wrapping up the last of their interviews and everything else they have to do. We'll discuss some of the other loose ends that they're still chasing up, but they believe they have enough to do this. And in my view, it has happened before. We've all seen it. The opening of what's his name? When Geraldo Rivera was opening Al Capone's tomb, and oh my God, we knew it was going to be a big end. It was empty. So, is it possible that they're going to completely botch this? Absolutely. But I have to believe they know what they're doing, and they know that if they don't provide receipts on at least 90% of what they've said, Fox News is going to hit them with it hard. Brooks had pointed out one time earlier, and I liked this comment very much. If Fox felt that they could make it look bad from the outset, they would in fact be showing this. They'd be airing it, because then they could say, hey, look at how bad it is. They're not airing it. So we'll cover all that. But anyways, that's what we are looking at. We are looking at the committee is going to make recommendations ostensibly to various law enforcement officials, but they can't do anything about this. This is not a trial. We are going to talk about some legal standards, including hearsay and what was it? When the chairman was testifying, it's not illegal because this is just a committee meeting. Having said that, it doesn't necessarily make for good evidence gathering. So we're going to talk about the pros, the cons, what we saw, what it means. Gentlemen, thank you all for joining us. So, I don't know. Initial thoughts, anyone? Oh, actually, before we do start, we do need to do one thing. So,
Ma'am, what happened to you?
I got maced. You got me.
Please.
And what happened? You were trying to go inside the
Yeah,
Capitol?
I made it like a foot inside, and they pushed me out, and they maced me.
What's your name? Where are you from?
My name is Elizabeth. I'm from Knoxville, Tennessee.
And why did you want to go in?
We're storming the Capitol. It's a revolution.
Thank you.
Dear Lord. All right, there you go. Yeah, they were LARPing is really what I said. That's the word. And then when that guy stuck out his chest, I want to get to that at some point. When that guy stuck out his chest, he was all like, "I'm ready to die for my country." I was like, "Yeah, all right." So, all right. So they've basically presented. Oh, and that is one of the things. So what they presented today was this is an overall view of our case, and they are handling this the way a prosecutor would, which is today they've started with the first step. What exactly happened? Not how did we get there, but what happened, so that we're all on the same page. If you start with okay, how did we get there? If you go forwards the way you'd think you'd start with Trump did this, then he did this, then he did this, then he did this. You know, by the time you haven't even agreed on what happened. So today was laying out the framework for what happened on January 6th. Definitely setting up the infrastructure for what they're going to do is blame Trump. Some of that blame. As Andrew had made an excellent point too. Listen, you know, part of being a politician is saying inflammatory things. Those guys at the end struck me as certifiably insane. Trump called me to speak. That's like how people talk about Jesus. That I'm aware of, Trump didn't speak to any of those people personally. So, you know, there may be some gaps in what we see. I had a few objections to some of the things that was said. We're going to cover that. But ostensibly what they're going to do is they're going to show that his rhetoric he knew was inflammatory. He knew it was doing these things. He had been briefed that this insurrection was going to happen. He essentially laid out the framework for it. He's going to say, well, he didn't realize what, and we'll see. But certainly Giuliani and the 7 states, which we're going to talk about, and certainly lying about the fraud. Apparently, you know, his own attorney general told him it was all bullshit. The entire Justice Department told him it was bullshit. Some 60 court cases, every single one of them decided that it was all bullshit, and he's still pushing it. And at a minimum, I think they're going to have a very easy time demonstrating that he was not really willing to cede power. What that led to, how, that's going to be the rub. So anyways, that's, I think, where we stand. So, Brooks, why don't I start with you? And then I'd really like to get his Andring's position, and we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fairly easy, I think, and we talked about it before. For me, this was about sitting through, and Democrats have a brilliant talent for snatching victory from the jaws of defeat. Like or I say that backwards.
Defeat from the jaws of
defeat from the jaws of victory. They suck is the short version. I think I should say they don't understand politics. They don't know what to do with power when they've got it. They don't know how important power is. So this was for me. I was watching because I have no doubt at all that there was a general, if not outright conspiracy. There was absolutely a desire. And I believe a genuine attempt to overthrow a democracy. And I think it did a lot of damage to our country in a significant way. So for me, it was less, watching to gain facts because, like I think we'll all end up agreeing with, we are probably more informed, and the people watching are more informed than most of America. We have no lives. But I think for me, this was, how are they going to handle this? What is the structure? Are they going to properly propagandize this? And that was, for me, the thing I was really watching for. How are they setting this up? How are they telling the story? How are they building the narrative? Are they doing it well? Is it going to work? And I found it extremely effective. I thought their witnesses were the smartest choices they could have made in a dozen ways. I thought the video they showed was violent enough without showing, I think, some of the worst stuff. And I think it generally played the direction that they want to be playing. And that's because ultimately all of this is political propaganda, either side. And I think they did an exceptional job telling the story they want to tell and setting things up for where they're heading or not. I don't think it matters as much at this point because I think they did a very good job so far. And this is the stuff people will remember.
Zandring?
I'm going to quote an oft-hated right-wing pundit. and say two things can be true at once. This can be a terrible thing that happened, and we need to understand, certainly should investigate how it happened and if there is a conspiracy behind it. And it can also be true that, it's awfully convenient of them to be able to roll this out now to try and direct attention away from how bad Americans think the country is going, according to recent polling, and back onto something that is more beneficial to the Democrats that are in power now. So I think both of those things are true. And I don't think that it's necessarily a bad thing that we have, kind of this televised informational, how did this happen? One of the things that I am convinced of is that Trump did indeed want to stay in power, and he looked at every possible means, including possibly illegal means, to do so, to try and get the clearly illegal means, to try and get the requisite votes, or at least cast enough doubt that he could do something to be able to stay in power. I am not convinced at this time that he coordinated or somehow planned what actually happened on January 6th, though it also seemed clear to me that he had no problems and seemed maybe even happy that it actually did happen, because he made no attempt for many hours to try and do anything to stop it. He just sat there in silence. It just makes me think that, he went, hey, this is actually good. This is kind of something that I wanted to see happen. I've got the popular support. We're doing this, let him go and let's see where this leads. And, only when it came to the point that it was like, okay, this is not going to turn out well for me if I don't try and oppose this in some way or another, that he finally came out and made an address. So I've never been pretty much a fan of Trump. I think he's done a lot of incredibly questionable things, potentially very dangerous things. So I'm happy that they're laying things out. They made quite a few pretty startling accusations, and I hope they have the evidence to actually back it up beyond just he said or somebody said this.
Let me make a suggestion, because I think this is something that they have not said clearly. And I don't know, I think that's kind of deliberate. It shoots you in the foot when you're doing it. But I think, again, it depends on who you think you're trying to who this is playing for. I will say this. Yeah, they're doing the last one in November. I think you're right. I think a lot of the structure of this obviously is not an accident. That doesn't make them wrong, may or may not make them opportunistic. It depends. It's a little hard to go there, but I think that's a fair observation. I will say that one of the things I don't think Trump explicitly, spoke to the Proud Boys. I don't think he spoke to these people. I don't, even through an intermediary, I don't think he said, well, hey, gee whiz, could you guys please do this? So the question, I guess there's a couple of questions in that element of it, because I do think that he engaged with the electors. I think that he was fully aware of what was happening with the electors. I think he was fully aware of what he was trying to get Mike Pence to do. So there's a whole bunch of, right now, we're looking at what I think is the weakest part of this entire thing. And without it, I don't think it falls apart. But I think it is worth bringing up. So there's really two questions. One, would I don't think you can sustain that Trump deliberate. Well, okay, let me rephrase that. I don't think he was specifically communicating to any of these people. And that's why I said that kind of Jesus guy, like, he was talking to me. No, boo-boo, he was not talking to you. But having said that, what was he doing? Now, was he just being an idiot and using rhetoric that can be very easily misunderstood? And something a lot of politicians have done. And you can't hold a politician responsible when they use rhetoric that ends up, as long as it's reasonable. If they're not crossing a line, and where is that line? This is where law gets interesting and really friggin' difficult. But plenty of politicians on both sides have said inflammatory things, and then every now and then a nut goes out and does something on it, and you're like, well, okay, that's not really the politician's fault. Having said that, sometimes politicians say things that you're sitting there going, you have to realize there are nuts out there, and they're going to take you literally, and you cannot say stuff like that. And then when you get busted on that, you walk it back and say, hey, to those of you nuts, this was not an encoded message. This was not. Now, first of all, so was Trump really just an idiot and didn't realize this? Or was he really trying to get people to act on this behalf. And I think with what they're arguing for, I've started listening to what he said, and I said, okay, if this was Tony Soprano, I'd know what he was saying and what he was doing. So the question is, did Trump really know what he was doing? And I think they're going to make the argument that, yes, he knew exactly what he was doing when he said, we're going to march up. And let me just, this is the question, and I'm going to stop talking because I'm dominating this. But let me make this final observation. He was saying stuff like, we need to march up to that Capitol, and we need to, go, and this is going to be a day that everybody's going to remember. And this is, what exactly did he think was going to happen? Because the election had already been had, and he had already lost. He had already lost. He had lost. So what exactly was he saying when he said this is going to be this huge event that everyone's going to remember, and we're going to... All that rhetoric that he had already lost. So what was it he was trying to do? What was he communicating to these people? The election had been held. It was just a certification process. So it seems to me that... it seems to me hard to argue that he was not trying to incite something on his behalf. All right. Anyway, so I see you fidgeting, Mr. Knott. Yes.
Yeah, a little bit. First question is, where is the November hearing? Where have you heard about the November hearing?
As I recall, now
because I only understood it to be the end of June is the last that they have scheduled.
I'll have to look into that. I honestly don't remember, but as I recall, I had thought they had said it, but I didn't hear it in this iteration of it. So I'll have to figure out where there was going to be some, or maybe it was a preliminary release on. Oh, it's a release.
Yeah,
okay.
They're supposed to release the findings or the report in November.
Yeah, which would be post-election or the day of, which would be hilarious. I think that's post-election if it's released November. A lot of this stuff, when we start talking about what someone knew and what they didn't, or how they ordered things, or what the literal evidence we have, I just go back to actually how we try criminal cases in this country. And the very bleak reality that the vast majority of people who are in prison not only did not even get a trial, but tended not to have almost any evidence to them, or are convicted of things that they simply didn't do simply out of plea bargains. That we live in a country where we don't care about evidence. But even at the top level of things, if we want to talk about RICO or these other things, the great stories of Rudy Giuliani, how he went through and he took down Carmine Persico as an example. And Persico is the only person who they had no tapes, no evidence, nothing, but they nailed him on generalized hearsay and how people talked about what he did know in the things he was in the room of. We've done this. This is a thing that we've done, and we've convicted people on Osama bin Laden. There's no direct evidence tying him to anything because we don't have those people. Most of them are dead, but we do know generally how things operate. And in this case, we can talk about, and we do know, even prior to this, the people who were involved in this in big ways, from the base operatives who, for example, the wife of Supreme Court Justice Jenny, for example, all the way down to Roger Stone, who also had a hand in the Brooks Brothers riot that tried to overturn and successfully did the 2000 election and was part of this and the organization of this and the driving of this. We know how these people operate and how they work. We know what they were talking about doing leading up to this day. This isn't just an event that comes out of nowhere. So the thing that they're lining up here, and they did, I believe, very expertly, was showing how not only was all of that a contributing factor, but that very specifically, there's a handful of groups from the prayer truth, whatever, the truthers, all the way down to the Proud Boys and the different types of Proud Boys, the Arizona Proud Boys, I believe they talked about. The way that they managed themselves and handled themselves that day made it clear that they were not there to see Donald Trump, that they specifically were scouting and dealing and doing things in checking out security, scoping the area, casing the joint, as you might say. And this reality that they brought in, where they showed not only through the documentarian how he was brought around and how they very much specifically knew what was going to be happening. It was planned out as far as they were concerned, which included the testimony from the Proud Boys, multiple of whom, just to go back on a statement that was made earlier, it is technically not a felony in the same way to lie to Congress. It's still illegal. You get held in contempt. A lot of these people are actually being questioned by feds, and you cannot lie to the FBI. That actually is a felony in and of itself. That's bad shit. So a lot of their testimony is actually coming from literal criminal cases that have already been adjudicated and people have already gone to jail for under their own commission of these sort of acts and their own admittance of them. So we have a lot of absolute facts that are pointing towards a generalized conspiracy that was taking place. The question is not whether or not there was a conspiracy. The question is, how much did any one person know and whether or not it went to the president? And I think today they made a very, very, very compelling case early on about how it extends high, how they were making these comments, even going so far as to have Ivanka throw her own father under the bus, where she was like, no, absolutely, the election was never... She knew it was bullshit from the beginning. We all knew it was bullshit from the beginning. Everyone knew, but that he was happy to perpetuate this lie and continue it on. And either we're going to say that Trump himself has the agency of a toddler and has no awareness, or we can go, hey, actually, he was aware of what was happening, and even in just broad strokes, and the people around him were doing it. And at that point, it's worth absolutely having the larger investigation. But again, Sandring, to your point about they're doing this now to distract, name a point in the last 18 months that you couldn't have said the same thing. Like literally, that's how this works, is politics is about distractions and moving back and forth. And there's no time when that wouldn't have been the case, like ever. So there, of course, that's a thing you can say. But here, they're doing it because we had an attack on the Capitol. We had a literal attack on the Capitol to stop an actual democratic election, which is a very, very fragile thing. The Liz Cheney, who I've hated for a long time, made an effective point when she brought up the George Washington line, where he willingly gave up power. And he could have, and by the way, how it normally is done, just said, yeah, you know, that democracy thing I promised? Yeah, I'm actually God Emperor for life. Thanks so much. This has been fun. And by having a peaceful transition at the beginning, he set this in motion. And now we've had 2 Republican administrations break that, but Trump do it excessively violently with an actual attack on the Capitol. And I think it's very easy to say that we know that this is true. The question is, how far does the conspiracy go?
So,
and I thought it was very effective.
I think that's an excellent point about the failure to pass your power on to the successor is the norm. That's the norm, and we rarely see any exception to that. Is Andrew, any thoughts?
Yeah, I do think that the question is going to be, can they connect Trump directly to some sort of collusion or conspiracy to enact or to get these things done? Titan brings up a good point. I think that he's both an idiot, and I will throw in also a raging narcissist, as well as, you know, possibly criminal, knowing that these things were possible and being okay if they happened, you know, but not specifically trying to engineer it. So that's the area that I'm wanting to, that I'm hoping to see more evidence in, as they can, you know, link, you know, Trump or his direct, you know, people to coordinating or, you know, conspiring with some of these groups. I don't have any doubts that these individual groups like the Proud Boys and the Oath Keeper people, I have no doubt that they were conspiring to do these kinds of things. You know, I think there's pretty clear evidence beforehand that they were preparing for all of this stuff. So that, whether that ties directly to Trump or people in his administration, that's the question that I want to know.
Well, I mean, we know that Roger Stone has deep embedded relationships with both, and that he was a pretty important member of Trump's cabinet and personal sort of guard. Like, again, these are, and again, if you want to talk about a narcissist, like Roger Stone is like the worst of the bunch. And if there's anyone who probably literally wrote somewhere, hey, I'm going to help President Trump overthrow democracy tomorrow, he might have gotten it tattooed on his ass. Like he's literally that person.
Well, he doesn't have much place left on his body to put it, but yeah, I'm sorry. What was Andrew?
Yeah, and that's not evidence of collusion, though. That's a compelling reason to investigate for it, and I'm perfectly fine with the investigation. I wish that, you know, the media and, you know, everybody took all of our politicians, all of the people in power, this seriously, and put them under this much scrutiny all of the time.
Well,
regardless of who's in power.
Well, you can't do this much scrutiny for absolutely everything. This was a extraordinarily serious charge.
Like, he went poop, we better investigate. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, keeping this close of an eye on thing. And when any kind of shenanigans start happening, that we're on top of it.
I mean, thousands of people stormed the Capitol to overthrow an election. This is not like, oh shit, I wish they had gone like this on Obama. Like, fuck Obama, he was an ass. He did a bunch of evil shit too. But literally in this case, I'm very much thinking that this is maybe worse, and that this is worthy of a super deep dive. Because again, literally overthrowing the very conception of what makes our country peaceful through transitional power is, I think, very important. And the moment you start breaking that apart, all it takes is one president not doing it. That is all it takes. That's all it's taken for other democracies. We're not a special thing. One just has to hold on. Oh no, I'll just do one more term, or suddenly I'm a lifetime term. Let's just wait for that to happen.
Well, and between the Benghazi hearings and the Hillary Clinton email, I mean, Hillary Clinton, certainly was investigated, to kingdom come on a large number of issues.
Ad nauseum.
Yep. So let me point out something that I had observed, and I think really strikes me, and I can't be the only one to have seen this. Nobody said anything. My suspicion is it will come out, and I think it's the fourth hearing when they talk about the fake electors. So the fake electors is interesting because we carried that one. We actually carried we actually have on In Time, because we carried the riots live, the insurrection live. We were covering it as they were going through the building, so it's a little weird to be now on the other end of this. But what had happened was, and I've linked it in the description, you can find our original. Now, we've learned a lot since then, but this was the original story where what we learned was in 7 states, there was various takes on a theme where another slate of electors came to take the place of the electors that had been certified by the state. Now, remember, you don't vote for president. You vote for ostensibly electors. Your state assigns those electors. Those electors go and they cast their votes for you for president. So they're the ones who do the voting. Now, we had covered also previously how I forget what it was, the PowerPoint presentation that had, it was called, I think it was named after his chief of staff, but the PowerPoint presentation that said 7 points as to how you could essentially overturn the election. And one of them was to go after the electors. And we had a very long discussion on this about whether or not he'd actually try it. So the number of past shows I'm going to have to link to on this because we had that discussion. But here's the interesting thing. What we learned was that in 7 states, they tried to replace the electors with counterfeits that would vote the way Trump wanted them to vote. Well, I shouldn't say that. So let me say the way that the whoever the organizer was wanted them to vote. Now, in Michigan, one of the fake electors was the head of the Michigan RNC, the state RNC. So these were all ones who were replacing Democratic electors. They were going to vote Republican. So the question is, who organized it? And when we aired, they had at least 3 that had said they got their marching orders from Rudy Giuliani himself. So that's already in the White House. You are now in the White House, and you are literally 1 degree from Trump. So the question is, did Trump know? But you had 3 separate, independent, from different states, following the same plan, saying they got their marching orders from Giuliani, after we had already discovered and pointed out that this had actually been floated as an idea. 7 states. We aired that episode, and that episode is linked below, January 20th, 2020, when we discovered 7 states had fake electors. That's when we discovered it. This, and what was to happen, we also discovered, and we covered this one too, for those of you who have been around for a while, Mike Pence rewrote his speech that morning to say he would only accept state-certified electors. So he knew there was a possibility he was going to get some fake electors. But here's the interesting thing. This we just aired. This is from the day of the riots.
USA! USA! 1 year ago, Trump supporters from across the country gathered in the nation's capital to protest Congress's certification of the 2020 presidential election results.
To use a favorite term that all of you people really came up with, we will stop the steal.
At a rally near the White House, President Trump spoke to a crowd estimated in the thousands, everyone from ordinary Americans to conspiracy theorists to members of right-wing extremist groups.
We will never give up. We will never concede.
Trump repeated the lie that the election was stolen, urging his supporters to march to the Capitol and fight.
You'll never take back our country with weakness. We fight like hell. And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
Sorry, I think I may have had that queued to the wrong place. So what I'm going to, I really do want to find this. So, oh dear Lord, I had thought it was in the first bit, but it may have been in the second. So let me go to when they were actually showing this. Here you go. It would be right about. Okay, let's give this a shot. I'm also going to change the volume is probably pretty low for you guys, so let me up the volume. Okay, let me give this a shot here. The volume is, I'm going to turn it on. It's going to be at the regular volume, but it will up in about 10 or 15 seconds, just in case, so I don't shock anybody.
Oath must mean something. Tonight, I say this to my Republican colleagues who are defending the indefensible. There will come a day when Donald Trump is gone, but your dishonor will remain. Finally, I ask all of our fellow Americans, as you watch our hearings over the coming weeks, please remember what's at stake. Remember the men and women who have fought and died so that we can live under the rule of law, not the rule of men. I ask you to think of the scene in our Capitol Rotunda on the night of January 6th.
Scene.
Towards
You are the half. You are the half. You are the half.
towards the United States Capitol.
There's a reason.
I'm probably not going to be able to find it. I may look for it while we're doing it, but there was early on in the testimony that we were listening to, one of the guys with the speakers with the bullhorn said, "We are only asking that Pence not certify 7 states and return those 7 states." Now, this was the day of the insurrection, and he was on a bullhorn shouting that. Now, it wasn't public information. It wasn't released that there were 7 states where there were bad electors until January 20th of 2020. So how did this guy know?
Well, I mean, I actually, if you want to know, you can talk to Tucker Carlson and you can talk to Lou Dobbs and the other conservatives who started talking about specifically these 7 states in 2020. Like January 15th, 2020, sent you an article, Lou Dobbs, Newsweek, talked about specifically those.
So,
that's
but
prior.
Okay, so, but, yeah. So, my point is, if Rudy Giuliani, if we already have Rudy Giuliani as having orchestrated this, the only reason to let that information, either that information leaked and these guys figured it out or whatever, or that was told, well, actually, I suppose that's a good point. So it is possible that they ran on it. Because if that's a good point. That's a good point. That's a good point. No, don't listen. You've watched this show, and you know, and listen, as Andrew gives plenty of pushback. As Andrew is not a Trump fan, but he keeps us honest. So I think you've got a very good point. You got a very good point.
It's of all the people, it's Lou Dobbs and these other horrific piles of crap, who are the ones who are just like, look at these 7 states. This is just weird. Yeah. And it was just like that call out happened early mid-December and it continued through, and it's very much the party line that sort of towed up to this. Like, to your point, this is the thing. Like, we're worried about Jan 6th as a riot. Well, let's set that aside for a second. Let's say the riot and the push was ultimately really to try to get Pence to just, decertify. That's all they wanted. If they could get decertification, that's kind of, that's all they needed. It's a big step. So they've been building up this media push the whole time amongst the hardline people. Like, look at these 7, focus on these 7, focus on these 7. They don't even need to know that they're bullshit. Just, these are the 7. And
Good
of
point.
all the fucking states, these are the ones you go after. Like, that's creepy weird, right? Super specifically. I think that's,
I think you're absolutely correct, and I appreciate you pointing that out. So, nope, you're right. You're right. I think that's a much more likely explanation. All right, well, there you go. So my brain was working overtime on that one. I was so proud for getting a good catch. All right, so all right. Well, are there any other? One of the other things I did want to point out, I did not like very much the Ivanka footage. Actually, I did not like the Ivanka footage, and I did not like the Bannon footage. The Bannon footage, I was kind of okay with, but it was.
I love the Ivanka footage. Oh my God.
Let me tell you why. Because twofold. First of all, both of those clips, the reason I'm always suspicious of short clips. I'm always suspicious of clips that are less than 10 seconds long because I don't know what the context is. And I just have to believe him that the context is what he says it is. Now, it may be available on YouTube and I can go out and find it, but that's just extra, and I probably will, but that's just extra. So I'm always suspicious when I hear or see clips that are that short because the shorter it is, the less context I have. I mean, you could also just have, just to highlight it as an extreme. I'm not saying this is what happened, but as an extreme, if Ivanka, ever said once, yes, that's what I believe. Do you think the sun is yellow? Yes, that's what I believe. They could take that and we asked Ivanka if she thinks the election if Biden won the election. And then you just show that, yes, that's what I believe. You don't know. Now, there was enough there that it wasn't that bad an edit, but you still don't know the context of what she was saying. And since she worked in the White House, God, oh, dear Lord, I hate the fact I have to say this. She worked at the White House, so it's not just, but it's like, okay, the reason she's there is because it's Trump's daughter, not because, she's an expert. I understand why it's an important argument, but that rubbed me the wrong way. Same thing with Bannon, just because it was short enough.
Are you seriously suggesting that the highest halls of power in this country is subject to nepotism? I can't believe you.
I actually, the Ivanka thing, it made me smile because I agree with everything you said. It has no probative value. It's not interesting. It does nothing for people. It does something or everything for one person, because Trump on his stupid little free speech platform, the only thing he could talk about was now no longer his daughter, no longer just Ivanka, but now Ivanka Trump, as if she is some otherized thing. Ivanka Trump was not involved in looking at or studying election results. She had long since checked out and was, in my opinion, only trying to be respectful to Bill Barr. Like, literally did it just to say, fuck you, Donald. And I kind of appreciate that. Like, that's what it was done for, because that's all you do is just create that rift and then just keep going, because it's going to force Jared to pick sides. Like, this is how you pick people apart. This is what you do.
Listen, I came so close to the only times we've ever gotten a strike that we could not appeal or had any real serious issue. We've showed people getting blown away on our air. We've showed people dying. We've showed a lot of some pretty horrific stuff. We've done the only ones that we get in serious trouble with where we could lose the channel. I swear to God. Oh my God. The Late Show. What's his name? Stephen Colbert. Stephen Colbert.
Colbert.
If we air Colbert for like more than 10 seconds, boom, we're down. And he did this one. I was like, I want to play it. It was a great clip, but I can't play 10 seconds of Colbert, or they will. They don't mind. They don't mind but the humor that gets them. But the Colbert said, well, Trump finally got what he wanted. He got fucked by Ivanka. Oh, yeah. Wow.
Very nice.
Oh, wow. And he delivered it much better.
But that's what that moment was for. Again, the whole thing, everything was just very well calculated. And it's kind of my joke that, like, it had to be Liz Cheney because Democrats don't understand what calculated means. Like, I don't think I think it was it added so much just for that moment because you knew who it was directed at. It was directed at literally only one person in the world.
I think you're right. I think you're absolutely. I hadn't. And that is cute when you see something like that. It's like it's. I can appreciate it on an aesthetic level. Maybe they should have done it, but I was like, yeah, somebody's just like, you know what? We're just gonna say hi, Trump. Hello there. We know you're there.
Yeah. and because he always calls Tiffany Trump, like because it's how he labels his children because he's a monster. And like my daughter Ivanka or Ivanka, now it's Ivanka Trump, and that's going to be fun for them. Good for them.
That whole holy, oh dear Lord. Yeah. All right. So, all right. Any other thoughts on anything that you liked, didn't like? What struck you as compelling? Not so. I mean, well, I got one, but I'll wait. I already said it earlier, so I'll wait. And what do you guys think?
Well, the one thing that I got was, how the length of this thing, and I kind of wished it had been a lot more concise. Obviously, I guess I'm wrong about that because a lot of people stayed tuned in for a hell of a lot longer than I would have expected them to. It's like, I follow a lot of this stuff, and even I was having a hard time trying to get through the whole thing. I was like, okay, can you just show me the highlights? So I'm like looking for highlights reels. So I guess I'm wrong about, what the people would sit through, but if I'm glad that they're investigating because, the serious things happen. And I don't like the idea of somebody trying to do everything that they can to try and remain in power. And I think that if they have good evidence that Donald Trump was, colluding to do all this or conspiring to do all of this, they need to nail his hide to the wall so we never have to hear from him ever again.
So, what was I don't know. I thought Brooks had a follow up there. All right. So,
no, I mean, I could. I think that the pacing of it is very particular. We're going to see them. This was basically an outline of what they're going to do. That's the steps. If you ever took high school speech, like at the beginning of a speech, you always say all of your points in the order you're going to deliver them. That's how essays are written. And this is all they did. It's a really fucking long essay with like multiple hours of things. And they went through most of it. And then they went through immediately. They dove right into the beginning of it, which is this police officer who is a right-wing poster girl, as far as I'm concerned. She's a blonde, white, pale cop, who couldn't even swear. She's so pure. She had to spell out the nasty, dirty words. Like that. Almost imagery is almost too much. Like for me, I was like, that's who you pick. And she was sweet, and she was terrified, and she was beaten, and she was scared. But then, like other things, one of the things that I would be very curious other people's thoughts. The National Guard taking hours to show up. Did anyone else find that weird?
Well, we've already discussed. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing was a failure in security. I mean, they knew weeks ahead of time that this was a potential problem, and they were seriously understaffed. And we had an entire show where we were talking about what was going on behind the scenes, because there seemed to be some problems going on, and then Pence is the one ends up being the one to issue commands to the National Guard, which shouldn't be what's going on. And so that whole thing is kind of bizarre and weird and leaves a lot of questions. And I hope that they get into that and they can answer some of those questions.
Same here. It's one of the things that I don't think that they actually did much investigation on, but I'm really curious of, because again, if you compare it to BLM, which there was no warning for the BLM protests, there were hundreds of riot officers and tanks and APCs and everything there.
Well, I would like to point out one thing, and this is one of the things that I disagree, because I hear this so much on the conservative side, was, look at all of the crackdowns that they've done and all the people who've gone to jails and all the trials that they've had, over this one fairly minor riot, as they call it. And then look at, the number of people that have actually been jailed over the, and stayed in jail, I should say, and all of the get out of jail funds that were promoted over the BLM riots. And I'm like, well, that's not really a valid criticism, because one, you're dealing with federal power, federal agencies, and then the other ones is the states. It's like the states can call up all that shit really fast. The federal government's a little bit different.
I'm literally talking about Washington, D.C. and literal apples to apples, though.
Well, with DC, there's a couple of issues. DC had at one point been offered the National Guard, and they said no. But one of the things was there was still this concern about how Trump had deployed the National Guard in Portland, and DC did not want Trump deploying the National Guard to act under his authority in that area.
I don't think you're still not hitting what I'm talking about. Literally on the same steps that these protesters were in front of, with the literal same, probably exact same barricades and the same officers standing side by side with them for this, which we knew about a week in advance. Everyone knew about this event.
Oh, you mean when the BLM was at Washington?
BLM, when it happened at literally those steps.
Yes.
And it was out of nowhere. It was a pop-up, because it was like a day notice tops. They had hundreds of riot guards literally on the same steps, hundreds of them, if not 1,000. And they had full weapons and gear, tear gas. There were APCs, there were tanks. Like, they did not fuck around with BLM in literally the same 20 by 20 spot. Like, I'm not talking about overall, I'm talking about literally in the same area. And it was a year before. So to me, that I just find it deeply, deeply suspect. And it is direct apples to apples. I'm not comparing it to, this state did this and that. I'm outside of Portland. I have a lot of issues with a lot of things, but literally the amount of people they could call up in a day's notice for a 7-day early event, or even a few hours, the fact that it takes a few hours for people to get to the Capitol in event of an insurrection or people storming it makes me feel like, why doesn't someone attack us and just take the Capitol if it takes us hours to respond? Obviously it doesn't. So I just have to say bullshit. I
see what you mean now. You're right. I did misunderstand. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know I'm trying not to compare it to the rest of BLM, because I do agree that that's one of those weird things, but like, I'm not literally like the exact same spot on Earth a year earlier it's with the same people in power, with the same power structures in place. And lo and behold, they just didn't do anything. And hey, look, the people who decided not to do anything are the ones who benefited most from the election being overturned. I wonder if that has anything to do with it. I can't imagine. Like, there's a lot of shit that I really wish they'd dig a lot more into, because Capitol Police, as much as I loved this woman, they're meant to like deal with like trespassers and vandalism. Like, this is not their bag.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I hope that they've got something into that. Sounds like they didn't do too much investigation on that, because this whole thing was an absolute security fail.
Oh, yes.
And it shouldn't have been.
No, it's the capital of America. Like, I'm just stunned by nothing happened.
The rest of the world too. I mean, the rest of the world is sitting there going like, wait, what? What? This is, oh, Jesus. Well, I do want to bring up another interesting topic, going back just a half a step here, because we were talking about how the hearings are playing and just how long they are and how much of a slog it is to get through them. But there's a couple of things. First of all, you see the same thing in trials all the time, and the reason is because you're playing to an audience of 12 people that you don't know a heck of a lot about. In this case, they're playing to the entire country that they don't know a lot about, so they're trying to hit a lot of bases and answer a lot of questions when nobody's asking them these questions. This isn't a give and take here. They're just presenting their case, and so they've got to get it as watertight as they can while also getting it out the door as quickly as possible. Human beings, to quote the good Dr. Reverend Christopher 𝐓𝐢𝐬𝐷, Esquire, the people are messy. People are very, very messy. And when the hardest, nobody believed Watergate because it was just too fucking stupid. And when Woodward and Bernstein were saying these things, nobody would reprint it because they're like, okay, I mean, it looks like you did your homework here, but nobody's this fucking dumb and nobody's going to do it. And the line between people breaking into the DNC building, the Watergate building, the DNC headquarters. And getting that to the White House was a long line. It wasn't, Nixon didn't just call these guys up and say, hey, listen, could you break into the White House? There were a lot of steps to get from A to Z, but there was absolutely a very direct line from those men to Nixon. But it took, I think, like 2 years before that really got to the point where it was just solid. It took 2 years, and it really wasn't easy. So now we're 2 years later, and we're getting the preliminaries on this, and it's at least as complicated. There isn't going to be that kind of direct line, and this is a different situation, too. This is absolutely a different situation, but there was clearly a lot of shenanigans. I call shenanigans. There were shenanigans, and there was a lot of, and I think they've got enough to hook them, even if they don't get them on specifically on inciting the Proud Boys, or even a step further than that. I think they got him, but I think it's worth trying to hit on that too, because I think he knew what he was saying when he said these things. I think he knew what it meant, and I think he knew what it was going to do. Because if he didn't, well, what is he rallying his base for? He lost, unless he is legit trying to overturn it. Did he know it was going to turn violent? And I think, yeah.
Yeah, the reason I bring up the Cosa Nostra, the trial that Rudy Giuliani actually oversaw, where they convicted a series of crime family leaders, basically without doing anything. They didn't really have evidence against one of them, but totally got him anyway, is because, like, that's actually how Trump has behaved always. There's multiple books have been written about him, and stories, and I mean, we've seen it in public, that he doesn't ever say things directly because he fancies himself like a crime boss. Like, he's such a fucking jackass. He fancies himself a crime boss, and he says things like, boy, yeah, it would be a shame if that happened, which is like ordering it. Like, he does this actively in public, and we know he does it in private. And there are multiple lawsuits that, like, he had to pay out because ultimately, even though he never said do the illegal thing, he totally said do the illegal thing. And we totally don't let people get away with that by having clever, stupid language. It doesn't work like that in the real world. That's a stupid mafia, like, garbage thing. We don't actually have a legal system that lets people go, oh boy, I'd be ashamed if someone shot you tomorrow with the 22 that I've got in my pocket. It's like, yeah, we don't let that work. So it's to your point about Watergate, people always don't realize that all of these people are this stupid, and they are that dumb. I go back to Iran-Contra is kind of like another great example of, no, they wouldn't be that brazen and dumb. And it's like, oh shit, they would.
Yeah, hey,
totally.
Hey, that's a nice constitution you got there. It'd be a shame if something happened to it.
It'd be a shame. It'd be a shame. It'd be a nice election you got there. Hey, it'd be a shame if we had 7 false electors. Just saying.
Well, that's what really got me thinking about it, was when he said, if Mike Pence doesn't do the right thing, I'm gonna be disappointed in Mike Pence if he doesn't do the right thing. I was just like, I was like, wow. Well, hearing that when they're on, we're all going to march up there, and I'm going to be disappointed if he doesn't do the right thing. What is his goal in saying that? I just want an answer to that. Like, what was going through his mind when he was saying that? Because he's saying we're all going to march up there. He's certifying the thing right now. What was his goal? Now, Zandring brought up an excellent point, which was that if it's, and I heard this, the I think it was the chairman, it may have been Cheney, was a little slippery with this. You're gonna hear testimony that, and she didn't say that he said, but essentially that he suggested, or that he had intimated that if they hang Pence, maybe he deserves it. And I was just like, oh, there is a difference between saying that and intimate. There's a huge difference. And intimating it, by the way, is not good. That's still a mafioso, but there is still a world of difference between those two. And the question is, how many people heard it, and what was his mindset going in? And this is why it gets complicated, is because you have to, it can't just be
power.
Yeah.
It's power. It's about who has power in the situation and who's in charge. Like, for example, if I were to say, and I very easily could have possibly been heard to say, all right, that'd be great if they did that, because it totally would be, I can totally see that, me saying that at some point. I am not in power to tell people what to do. Like, it's meaningless from me. I'm just some asshole. He's not. We can't pull the context that he exists in within this group of people and within the power structure that he's absolutely managing. When the president says, yeah, maybe that would be a good thing, you do that. If you've ever had a boss, or if you've ever been in the armed services, or you've ever had someone who's slightly passive aggressive as a parent, you know exactly what it means is, boy, it'd be nice if someone cleaned the table. And if you go, oh, it would be, I agree with you, I'm going to leave now. That's not, we know how these things work and power structures work. It's just, again, it's if you pull him out of all the context, sure, we need to find out. We have all the context. We know the 4 years leading up to it. We know how things were behaved. We know the people involved, and we know how he encouraged them. Literally, Roger Stone hired the Proud Boys and the Oath Keeper separately to do security for him at multiple events. It's not like they didn't have a deep financial relationship and personal relationship. Like, we know these things because he talked about them, because again, he's the world's best narcissist. He's very good, a number one narcissist. So, like, again, put all these things together. I'm less interested personally in whether or not we have proof. It's a question of how deep it goes and how hard hitting they can make it. And that's the thing I was very encouraged by for this last hearing.
I'm going to interrupt. I had sent Pat a link earlier to the show, and I did backslashes the wrong way instead of forward slashes. I've resent the link, Pat. We would love to have you. There's a lot we'd like to discuss with you. So Pat is one of the ones that very much would like to have him on if Pat, you can make it. The other thing I wanted to say was... that's why we have to go through the minutia. I get very concerned when we have to talk about what somebody was thinking when they did something, because there's no way to know 100%. How do you know what they were thinking? You can get reasonably sure through any number of things. It's very hard, unless they say, I'm thinking this, this, and this. And even then you don't know. But we'll try to stay out of solipsism for a minute. So what's going to be at issue here is, what was he thinking? At least one of the big issues. What was he thinking when he said a whole bunch of statements, and what was he thinking in the White House as this was unfolding? And the evidence seems to be very clear that he had no interest in stopping this, and that he wasn't particularly surprised. And the testimony that I recall was a number of people saying he was watching television going, yeah. So if that's true, then you still haven't crossed that line to, did he do this on purpose, or was he at least aware that something like this was going to happen? But they're trying to cross that line, and it's just going to take a lot of evidence to get there. So that's one thing. What were you going to say?
I'm going to disagree. I don't think it matters what he was thinking. I think what matters is the very base level of whether or not he had a what they might call the guilty conscience, whether or not what he knew was not necessarily right. And that's it. Like, we don't need to know if a person intended to kill someone or intended to do, like, there's some levels where we have that, but like, a guilty conscience is what matters in this. Because if he knew he was doing the wrong thing, if he knew what he was doing is not in line with presidential duties, basically, in line with the Constitution, basically, the rest doesn't matter. Like, it's entirely irrelevant. When you are the president, and when you are the president, you take an oath to uphold the Constitution. You take an oath to uphold the rules and regulations of this country. And when you sidestep those things for any level of personal gain, hide it, which we know he's done, and show that you have a generalized guilty conscience by hiding everything, putting everything under NDA, doing all this other shit, instead of just being like, oh, look, there's nothing here, or I didn't realize it was bad. Sure, even go with that defense. But knowing he was doing things that will get him in trouble, like, that's all I need. I don't need the rest. I don't understand why we necessarily need to have this, like, deep Freudian level understanding of Trump. We don't.
Keep in mind, I'm only going for the weakest, what in my view is the weakest claim in all of this, which is that he essentially he was essentially directing the Proud Boys and the riots at that point. And I think for that you need it, because he can't direct them if he's just being an idiot. If he's deliberately trying to incite them to do something, I think you got him. But then you have to understand what he's thinking. I think for everything else, I think he's going to get hooked on it. Well, hooked. I've predicted that he was going to get hooked on. I think he's going to get hooked on Deutsche Bank. I think he's going to get hooked on his taxes. I think there's so much money laundering. I think he's in trouble with so much. And I keep saying, okay, when the Southern District is the most tenacious district in the country, and 2 lawyers resigned because they said, "We've got him." And when I say we've got him, they've got him to the degree where you can indict. They've got him to that. They said, then they resigned because the Southern District wasn't going after him. And I don't, the number of times that they've had enough that they could at least indict him, and nobody wants to do it. I don't understand why. I think he's going to get hooked on Deutsche Bank, but I think they're going to get him in the sense that they'll be able to demonstrate that. To what you need for a grand jury easily, that there's a possibility of conviction. I think you'd easily pass the bar for civil, which is beyond a preponderance of the evidence, just based on what we see. I think most people are going to come away looking at it and say, yeah, he probably did it. And I don't, okay, that's what I think I think you've got enough to hook him on that. What are they going to do? I don't know. That's a really good question. It depends on how upset the people get, I guess, but I haven't seen... Do you think the Justice Department is going to do anything with this?
No. I think we may see some of the ancillary people go. Again, this is, I don't believe anything will come of this for Trump. I would love all of this, and I have fantasies about not just Trump, but everyone in some level being taken down. But that's like hyper idealistic. We live in a space where the Deutsche Bank thing isn't going to happen, because if it does, there's knock-on effects to the rest of Deutsche Bank, who isn't just doing this for Trump. They're doing it for lots of people. Like, Trump isn't like one special person in their pile. He's just symptom of all of the rest of it. And if one falls, the rest go. It's why unicorns in the tech industry can't be killed. Uber's still a multi-billion-dollar company. So is Tesla, despite, not having reason for either of those things to be the case. But as soon as one starts falling apart, the rest of the unicorns go. And that's how investments in capital work. You can't let all of it die. So Deutsche Bank's not going to happen. We know that the power structure in this country isn't going to go after him at all. In any way. We just don't do that over and over. The thing this will do, and the thing I want it to do, is to depress the Republican vote and to encourage the Democratic vote in the midterms. I don't give a shit about anything else. I don't think anything else is possible. That's all I want. I want the midterms to not hit the Dems nearly as hard as it could. I want the Republicans to get more pain, ideally a lot more. And I want continued, at least incremental change in the direction I want.
The lowest possible bar. And that's not a criticism, by the way. That's just an observation. But, I think the people that I most respect and have spent the most time with in politics you get very cynical about what can be done. So, yeah. Zandring, thoughts?
Well, you compared Trump directly to Pinochet, and I agreed with you.
I did, yes.
So you're not going to see me suddenly standing up to defend Trump himself. I did not like him. I thought he did a hell of a lot of very questionable things. I do believe that he tried every avenue he could think of to remain in power. Instead of going, accepting that, hey, you got outvoted, and now you're done. So yeah, I can't. I hope that we can get through all of this stuff and finally be able to put Trump to rest and never have to hear about him or see him ever again. Whether that means actually indicting him or just completely so discrediting and destroying him that nobody would think to really support him again.
You were more pissed about that than I was. So we had done a show when we learned that they were picking people up off the streets in Portland in the SUVs with ostensibly cops in military uniforms. The mom vans.
They weren't. Yeah, they weren't even SUVs. They were mom vans. They were minivans.
And they were picking up people having essentially a secret court. There was no receipt that you had ever been picked up or seen a judge or anything like this. And I was like, that's how Pinochet started. And he started doing it with, drug dealers and so-called enemies of the state. But because he became the state, if you wrote a bad article about him, you were the next guy to go. And here was Trump doing it. And I was pissed. I was calling him Pinochet. You were even more pissed.
I was, because that is literally how you run straight down the road of tyranny. It's like you started against people. And what really pissed me off was the fact that it had conservative support, that the conservatives were all happy about this. I'm like, well, no, wait a minute. Are you talking about you're happy that all due process has been thrown out the window? You're happy that these people literally disappeared? You're happy that people that you can't even verify are actually law enforcement are just showing up and picking you up and taking you away and nobody can find you? I understand that they're doing this against the rioters in Portland, and everybody seems to, kind of dislike them, so they have support. But that's how this stuff always starts. You go against the people that most people hate. And then you slowly expand it. It's like, yeah, I was super pissed at that, especially because, people who were supposed to be conservatives, who were supposed to be, questioning governmental power, were championing this. And it's like, no, this is absolutely horrible. Stop.
Well, the easy statement is that's how conservatives have always been. The other thing is we literally watched the government brag afterwards as well about sending marshals, and Trump outright said that he sent them to kill and execute the one man. He said that, and they did. And right-wing media went nuts for it, loved it. Taking care of crime, stopping the Antifa in their tracks. And that scared the living shit out of me. Like that was it. That was it for me. That made me turn the road on guns, actually. I didn't have a penny in before. Now, yep, can't take them. Thank you very much. Need those. I'm being targeted. Thank you.
Well, that was the other thing that I found interesting was if any of the people, they're lucky that the ones they were going after were on the left. If they'd been going after somebody on the right and picking them up off the street, you haven't, let's assume these were legit police officers. They haven't identified themselves. They've just come and snatched you off if anybody there is armed, like many of the people on the right are saying we need, that could have gotten out of control. I was like, wow, that was just, yeah, that was that. I felt like I was living on another planet when I remember that episode. Jesus.
But I also, it's Obama. To be fair, and both sides, Obama did actually execute multiple Americans extrajudiciously as well. So let's just be fair. This is a thing we do, and it's the only thing. Also, conservatives did not get on Obama for, of all the things. Like he wore a tan suit and they wouldn't stop talking about it. But but drone strike kids who were American citizens born here because their dad was a terrorist who you've already killed, and it's cool.
Those kinds of things piss me off.
So now, I haven't confirmed this. I suspect it's true, but let's take it with a grain of salt. But this was something I'd seen in Wall Street Journal's guest saying, quote, Mr. Trump betrayed his supporters by conning them on January 6th, and he is still doing it. Now, I assume that's an op-ed, so when I say Wall Street Journal, I've got to be a little careful with that. New York Post. Both of these are owned by Rupert Murdoch, if I recall. Trump has become a prisoner of his own ego. He can't admit his tweeting and narcissism turned off millions. He won't stop insisting 2020 was, quote, stolen, even though he's offered no proof that it's true. Meanwhile, reports that Trump was pleased that the January 6th crowd chanted for Vice President Mike Pence to be hanged is a truly reprehensible statement, makes him unworthy for office. Trump can't look past 2020. Now, keep in mind, that could also, Fox, you had an interesting position, Brooks, on the problem Fox is going to face, and I would like to discuss that, and then we should probably wrap up. We're going to be at this again reasonably early tomorrow, or today, actually, but we're going to be covering, we're covering all of this. This is what we do, so we'll be we're going to be covering the whole thing. But this also may just be that Rupert Murdoch has decided Trump is a brand that's no longer going to succeed, and he's moving on. I don't know what it means, but at any rate, Brooks, I'd like to get your take on it.
I don't think it's drastically different. If you were going to remind me what my take was before, that would help too.
Yeah.
No, go.
Well, no. First of all, your take on whether or not they're actually I mean, if those are just op-eds, that may just be something to try to suggest that they're
I think they're going to have to they're going to have to start distancing themselves because, again, as I'll say, and I'm always surprised people disagree with me on this. Elections are not about converting people. There's no such thing as the independent voter. It's a myth. It's a it's the white-tailed albino deer that you chase for miles and miles and miles. It doesn't exist. The reality is it's about depressing your opponent and their base, and about inflating your own and making them passionate. The challenge is that Fox News is not, they've been doing their best with the trans issues to try to get out the vote. But now with abortion being apparently solved, as far as they're concerned, it's going to be difficult for them to actually drive significant people out in this election versus others. And this is only going to make it worse as we start seeing a lot of these names, especially senators that people are going to have to be going and voting for, or congressmen who it might turn out to be complicit, or like the examples they talked about, who literally were asking for pardons based on what they did on January 6th. These things are going to start being difficult for a lot of these people to like get passionate about going and voting for. And so the trans issue is also fizzling out as a thing, which I'm very happy about. Fox did a shockingly beautiful piece on a young trans man who had transitioned, and his very white picket fence family who was conservative and Christian who support him, and how beautiful it was. I was stunned. It went out in the last couple of days. So we're seeing a lot of shift in the way that Fox is handling stuff. And I think that's just going to force his tiny base to harden, but I don't think it drives electors. And Fox is wanting to go with the mainstream. They are, as much as anyone, doesn't want to say it, Fox is mainstream news. Like, they're the single largest news organization in the world, and they're the largest in the US by a decent mile. So they have to follow in some place their audience. And as much as, there's someone saying, oh, their audience is going to Newsmax, we know from ratings that's not fucking true. We know that they're not really chasing that. And so we're going to start seeing, I think, a course correction for Fox pretty regularly, but it's going to be slower than I think they may want to go.
Well, and also the Murdoch's kids, who would also, of course, be Murdoch, but at any rate, Murdoch's kids are also ostensibly more liberal. So I think the channel may end up moving as a result of that. You had said so. This was one of the things they've been awfully quiet about this. They're the only major, and they are the largest network in the United States, and they're the only network that didn't carry this at all. And in fact, Tucker Carlson went for the first half of his show without a single commercial interruption. So nobody got the notion of going to go change the channel. So they were so desperate to keep viewers, they weren't doing what ostensibly you keep viewers for, which is for the ad revenue, because they just didn't want the viewers to go anywhere else. So, but one of the things that you had pointed out, and I thought this was worth repeating, you had pointed out that in the past, when they have the ability to utterly destroy somebody else's narrative, they do. Yeah, please.
Yeah, no, they selectively edit, but they at least show it. They go and they make it about, it's a black woman. Can you believe a black woman saying these things? You know what that means. I mean, here's how this works. Or, look, it's someone who vaguely is metrosexual, which is my favorite one, I think, that they end up going after. They do a lot of that sort of feelings matter more than your facts bullshit, as conservatives do. And so as you sort of make your way through how they're handling this, they're flat out not going after these people. There is no assassination squad going after this police officer. They're going after Liz Cheney, for sure. And that's fine. I don't care about that. Go after all these senators, have fun. But they're not going after the witnesses. They're going after, it's been calculated again. And I said this at the beginning, the calculations of who they chose and how they chose and what they had them talk about was so fucking smart, because you cannot pull a single clip from either of them. Like, go watch and just take a sentence, try to do an Andy bullshit edit, have fun. You can't do it. Nothing out of context makes them look anything but bad. and it gets worse as they talk. And so you can't let their stuff go in front of it. The entire 2 hours, Fox basically played defense by saying it didn't matter. Immediately after it, I immediately turned to Newsmax, and Newsmax said it was a failure, the lowest ratings of any program ever, which is awesome because literally we found out it's one of the higher ones. Like they're saying anything they can. And now they're saying that, yeah, well, it had high ratings because it was a stunt. And it's like, yeah, that's the game you're playing. Whatever you need, you're happy to use it to shit on something. That's how it works. But you can't show the real thing anymore. It's going to be fun to watch. This whole thing is actually, I think, a lot more entertaining than I thought it would be.
All right. Well, I think we're going to need to wrap it up. I'm going to need to get some sleep. It's around 2 a.m. over here, and we got an early start tomorrow. Is Andrew any final thoughts before we head out?
It's going to be interesting to see where it goes and
for sure
what they actually present and how they get everything set up.
Well, it is, and it's like we had, there's a lot that goes into any production that you try to make, that in time takes a lot to produce and to make it look professional and do the best we can. YouTube has algorithms and the whole 9 yards, and you try to learn all this stuff. But the reality is that's exactly what senators also have to do, which you'd think they shouldn't have to. But managing perception of a story is more important than the story itself often, and the level of thought that has to go into it is and having been a campaign operative for a short period of time, I've seen it. It's surprising, but I think Brooks, you're reminding us of just how every word has to. They're all reading off their notes. Everything is completely, and they've been thinking about this for a very long time. So we're going to see how it plays out. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. Thank you. Brooks, thank you, Xandering. If you are here now, I hope you've liked the stream. We've put a lot of time into it ourselves as well. So if you can like, subscribe, and share. If you like our coverage, share it on social media. Give it out to your friends if you think it's of value to you. We appreciate it, and it's a great way to help us. We also have a Patreon if you want to join that, or just come into the Discord. We get most of our news from people who contribute on the Discord. We have channels for philosophy, psychology, gaming, and it's a pretty active Discord, so I hope you will come on in and check us out tomorrow, or today, really, because it's already Monday. So Monday at about 9:45, actually, we're going to start maybe about 10 or 15 minutes before the hearings start. We're going to start our coverage on overtime of the second day of congressional hearings. Once that is concluded, as we did today, about 5 minutes after that's concluded, we're going to go into in time and we're going to discuss it. Brooks, I hope you are there. I think Sunday is going to be there. Xandering, I hope you can make it too. And to all of you watching, I hope you guys can make it, and look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Good night, all.